Content warning: this documentary contains descriptions of extreme human experimentation, torture, and mass death. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. There are experiments that changed science. There are experiments that crossed ethical lines. And then there is Unit 731. A chapter of history so disturbing that for decades, the world barely spoke about it. They called us Merida. Logs. Not people. Logs. Because we were just raw material for their experiments. In the frozen plains of Manchuria, China, there once stood a facility so secret, so horrifying, that even 80 years after its destruction, Japan has never fully acknowledged what happened here. This is the story of Unit 731. Japan's biological and chemical warfare program, where between 1936 and 1945, at least 10,000 people and possibly as many as 300,000 were murdered in the name of science. And why the world chose to forget. His name was Shiro Ishii, a brilliant microbiologist, a charismatic army surgeon, and one of history's most prolific mass murderers. Ishii was a genius, no question. He graduated top of his class from Kyoto Imperial University. But he was also a narcissist who believed Japan needed biological weapons to compete with Western powers. In the 1930s, Japan was expanding aggressively across Asia. The Second Sino-Japanese War had begun. Japan needed an edge. Ishii convinced the Japanese military that biological warfare was that edge. Ishii was given unlimited resources, complete secrecy, and no oversight. He was told, develop biological weapons that could win the war. No questions asked. No limits. In 1936, construction began on a massive facility near Harbin in Japanese-occupied Manchuria. It covered 6 square kilometers. It had over 150 buildings, prison blocks, laboratories, crematoria, and it was staffed by over 3,000 scientists, doctors, and military personnel. Its official name was the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kwantung Army. Its real name was Unit 731. And its purpose was to conduct experiments on living human beings to perfect biological warfare. Who were the victims? The official answer: prisoners of war, criminals, spies. The truth: anyone the Japanese military wanted to disappear. They took Chinese civilians, farmers, merchants, women, children. They took prisoners of war: Chinese, Russian, Mongolian, Korean. They took people accused of being thought criminals or resistance fighters. Many were completely innocent. Victims were arrested, often on fabricated charges, and transported to Unit 731. They were registered, given numbers, and from that moment on, they ceased to be human. They were Merida logs. They were called logs. Not humans. Not prisoners. Not civilians. Logs. This single word made everything easier. Dehumanization is the first step toward atrocity. Psychology proves this again and again. When people are reduced to objects, empathy disappears. And Unit 731 depended on this mindset. Men, women, children, infants, pregnant women, the elderly, no one was exempt. If Unit 731 needed subjects, they took them. And once you entered those gates, you never left alive. What's crucial to understand is that these weren't just experiments on prisoners. This was industrialized murder disguised as science. Every person who entered Unit 731 was going to die. The only question was how, and what data could be extracted before death. The following section contains detailed descriptions of human experimentation, torture, and murder. The information is presented for historical and educational purposes. If you need to pause or stop watching, please do so. The most common procedure at Unit 731 was vivisection surgery on living subjects without anesthesia. Ishii believed that using anesthesia would alter the body's natural state and contaminate the data, so surgeries were performed on fully conscious, restrained subjects. Former technician in Uni 731 says, "I assisted in hundreds of dissections. We would cut them open while they were alive to see how organs functioned. The screaming. I can still hear it." Subjects were infected with diseases plague, cholera, anthrax, typhoid, then dissected at various stages of infection to observe the disease's progression in real time. They wanted to see what plague did to lungs, liver, brain. So they would infect someone, wait a specific number of days, then cut them open while alive to preserve the freshest samples. They treated human beings like laboratory rats. The reports were meticulous. Detailed observations. Precise measurements. Clinical language. As if the subjects weren't people screaming in agony, but simply data points. Unit 731's primary mission was to develop biological weapons. That meant testing them on human subjects to determine effectiveness. Subjects were exposed to plague-infected fleas, released into rooms to measure infection rates. Anthrax bombs, tied to stakes in fields and bombed. Poisoned food and water, to test contamination methods. Weaponized cholera, typhoid, and dysentery. Former Unit 731 doctor says, "We would tie prisoners to posts at various distances from the blast site, then detonate bombs filled with plague or anthrax. We'd observe who died, who got sick, how quickly the disease spread. The goal was to determine the most efficient way to kill the largest number of people with the least amount of resources. They tested delivery methods: bombs, artillery shells, crop dusters. They tested environmental variables: temperature, humidity, wind direction. This was industrial-scale murder masquerading as scientific research." Japanese troops fighting in Manchuria's brutal winters suffered high rates of frostbite. Unit 731 was tasked with finding treatments. Former Unit 731 staff says, "We would take prisoners outside in winter, force their arms into barrels of ice water until frozen solid, then test different thawing methods. Hot water, lukewarm water, direct heat. We'd hit their arms with sticks to test if they were frozen enough they'd make a sound like hitting wood. Subjects' limbs were repeatedly frozen and thawed to study tissue damage. Many lost arms, legs, ears, noses to gangrene and necrosis. Those who survived one experiment were used in another." The catalog of horrors extended far beyond disease and frostbite. Pressure chamber experiments. Subjects placed in vacuum chambers until eyes popped from sockets, organs ruptured. Centrifuge experiments. Spun at high speeds until death to study G-forces. Weapon testing. Grenades, flamethrowers, chemical weapons tested on live subjects at close range. Transfusion experiments. Replaced human blood with horse blood, seawater, other substances. Dehydration studies. Denied water until death to measure survival limits. Electrocution studies. Lethal voltage applied to study electrical injury. Rape and forced pregnancy. Women raped, infected with syphilis, then dissected at various stages of pregnancy. There was no experiment too cruel, no procedure too painful. The only limit was their imagination. And they had decades of work ahead of them, thousands of subjects, and complete impunity. By 1945, at least 10,000 people had been murdered in Unit 731's laboratories. But the death toll didn't end there. Unit 731 didn't just experiment in laboratories. They field tested their weapons on Chinese cities and villages. Between 1940 and 1945, Unit 731 conducted at least 11 documented biological warfare attacks on Chinese civilian populations. They dropped plague-infected fleas from aircraft. They contaminated wells with cholera. They distributed poisoned food. In 1940, Japanese planes dropped ceramic bombs filled with plague-infected fleas over the city of Ningbo. Within weeks, the plague outbreak killed hundreds. By 1941, the attack on Changde killed thousands more. The exact death toll will never be known. Conservative estimates suggest at least 200,000 Chinese civilians died from Unit 731's biological attacks. Some historians believe the number exceeds 500,000. These weren't military targets. They were civilians. Villages. Cities. The goal was terror. To break Chinese resistance by demonstrating Japan's willingness to use weapons of mass death. August 1945. Japan is losing the war. The Soviet Union has declared war and is advancing into Manchuria. Unit 731 faces imminent discovery. Ishii received orders, destroy everything. Leave no evidence. Kill all remaining prisoners. In the final days, Unit 731 went into a frenzy. They executed all remaining prisoners, hundreds of people. They dynamited buildings. They incinerated documents. They released plague-infected rats into the Chinese countryside, causing outbreaks that lasted for years. By September 1945, Unit 731 had been reduced to rubble. Its staff scattered. Its victims erased. Ishii and his top scientists fled back to Japan. And then came the cover-up. After Japan's surrender, American occupation forces began investigating Unit 731. What they discovered horrified them. But it also intrigued them. The United States was entering the Cold War. The Soviet Union was the new enemy. And Unit 731 had data, years of human experimentation data that no American scientist could legally obtain. In 1946, American military scientists interviewed Ishii and his top researchers. The deal was simple: immunity from prosecution in exchange for full disclosure of all experimental data. The documents are chilling. American officials acknowledged that Unit 731 had committed war crimes of the most heinous nature. But they argued that the data was invaluable and could not be obtained elsewhere. The Americans decided that the scientific value outweighed justice for the victims. They granted immunity to Ishii and dozens of Unit 731 scientists. Not a single person was prosecuted by the United States for Unit 731's crimes. At the Tokyo War Crimes trials, Unit 731 was never mentioned. The Soviet Union tried to raise the issue, but the United States blocked it. The cover-up was official. Shiro Ishii lived freely in Japan until his death from throat cancer in 1959. He was never prosecuted. He never apologized. He never showed remorse. Ishii became a consultant for the U.S. biological warfare program, Many of his top scientists went on to prestigious careers in academia, medicine, and industry in Japan. They became university professors, hospital directors, pharmaceutical executives. Some names: Masaji Kitano became head of the Green Cross Pharmaceutical Company. Ryoichi Nato founded Japan Blood Bank, became wealthy businessman. Hideo Futoji became professor at prestigious Japanese medical school. These were men who murdered thousands. And they lived comfortable, successful lives. They died of old age, surrounded by family, honored by colleagues. Their victims died screaming in agony, forgotten by history. For decades, Unit 731 was erased from history. Japanese textbooks didn't mention it. The Chinese government, focused on rebuilding, didn't pursue it. The United States kept its secrets classified. It wasn't until the 1980s that researchers began uncovering the truth. In 1984, a Japanese journalist, Akira Yoshimura, published the first exposé. In 1989, construction workers in Tokyo discovered human bones and experimental equipment evidence Unit 731 had operated in Japan too. Chinese survivor says, "My father was taken to Unit 731 when I was a child. For 70 years, I didn't know what happened to him. Now I know. But there has been no justice. No apology. Nothing. Today, the site of Unit 731 is a museum. Survivors and families of victims have sued the Japanese government for acknowledgement and compensation. They have lost every case. The Japanese government's position is that Unit 731 existed, but they will not officially acknowledge the extent of the atrocities. They will not apologize. They will not pay compensation. The official line is that the issue was settled by the post-war treaties. In China, the memory is kept alive. In Japan, it remains controversial. In the West, it's barely known. Unit 731 stands as one of history's darkest chapters. A reminder that science without ethics is not progress, it's atrocity. That genius without humanity is monstrosity. And that justice delayed is justice denied. At least 10,000 people and possibly hundreds of thousands more died because of Unit 731. They were murdered in the name of science, in the service of war, for data that was ultimately useless. Their names are mostly forgotten. Their faces lost to history. But their deaths demand remembrance. Because when we forget atrocities, we risk repeating them. The victims of Unit 731 were not logs. They were not numbers. They were people. Fathers and mothers. Sons and daughters. Human beings who deserved to live. And they deserve to be remembered.